Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. In October of 2023, we had Greg Lukianoff on the show. He's the co-author of a book that came out a couple of years ago called Canceling of the American Mind. Cancel culture undermines trust and threatens us all, but there is a solution. And Greg, when he was on the show, suggested that the threat to free speech through cancel culture is as dangerous to free speech as the McCarthyite Red Scare of the 1950s. His co-author of the book, Ricky Schlott, was also on the show, and we had an interesting conversation, I have to admit.
It's on a similar scale to that on campus, to be clear. The one of the worst parts of the Red Scare in the United States was actually what's now called the Lavender Scare, and those are the public employees who were blackmailed out of their job for being gay. But when it comes to the number of professors who were fired during McCarthyism, it's about 62 is the standard number.
Well, yeah, Greg, and we had an interesting exchange. Yeah. As you can tell, Greg is not shy. I'm thrilled he's back on the show. But my question, Greg, to begin, is that was then, of course, October 23, a very different kind of time.
Yeah.
Has the events, particularly of the last few months, have they changed your mind in any way about what you wrote in The Canceling of the American Mind, about cancel culture, about the threat of woke culture on American campuses?
Oh no. Like in terms of, and I still got frustrated by a lot of, and I'm from the left myself, but people on the left who like to pretend that the thing that Trump is responding to on campus didn't happen at all. And my take is always, yeah, it happened. It was really serious. It's still actually happening to some degree, but Trump's response to it is completely violating the law. So, I oppose authoritarian tendencies, whether they come from the right or the left.
Do you see, though, when you speak of authoritarian tendencies, are they similar, the ones that you wrote about in The Canceling of the American Mind from the left, from the university, and Trump's attempt now to stifle free speech?
They're closely related because a lot of the justification for what Trump is doing is actually in response to what he sees going on campuses, in journalism, in pro bono practices for law firms. A lot of which he doesn't have a point for example, his attack on law firms, going after just people who opposed him, or his attack on people like Ann Selzer, who was a pollster who got a poll wrong. But when it comes to things like media bias, yeah, that's real. When it comes to what's been happening in academia, though, it's been terrible for a long time. And forgive me for sounding a bit frustrated about it, but I've been screaming about this for years. And one thing that I have found really funny is watching people being like, well, Greg shouldn't have actually, and the people who brought to attention to the fact that it actually had gotten this bad on campus, well, they're to blame for this happening. It's like, no, it's the people who are actually getting professors fired for years that are to blame for the very predictable backlash that's currently happening. But we're front of the line defending campuses, even campuses we think are major sinners in this respect. Harvard, for example, like how much time I'm spending defending Harvard right now, a school that finished dead last on our campus free speech ranking 2 years in a row, and to be clear, really earned that last place spot. But just because a school has been a bad actor on things like academic freedom and freedom of speech doesn't mean the government magically gets to establish new powers to basically say, because I've already found you guilty on these things without going through the process at all, I'm going to now effectively nationalize probably the most prominent private college in the United States. I mean, I'm a little more partial to Stanford myself, but Harvard, the things that they've been trying to pull from the Trump administration, they're outside of the law. They violate First Amendment academic freedom principles, and every American should be standing up to them. I just wish some of those Americans did a little bit more to stand up against what was happening on campuses that produced this backlash in the first place.
So what exactly in your mind is Trump trying to do, and why is he doing it?
Trump is always very hard to figure out, like, what he's actually doing. The very impulsive and oftentimes erratic. But I think the kernel of the strategy is essentially to go after places that empower the left. That essentially, one of his advisors on this is a guy named Chris Rufo, someone that who hates our guts, particularly mine, because we opposed the Stop Woke Act in Florida, a law that he championed that would have banned, woke topics from being taught in Florida. And of course, that's laughably unconstitutional. So we warned about it. Defeated it in court. But one of the things that Rufo has written about is the idea that there are all these institutions that sort of produce a sort of an activist version of leftism that are publicly funded, and there's no reason why we need to publicly fund them. So when you look at the strategy from knowing that Rufo is one of the advisors, some of what they're doing to higher ed is basically trying to diminish the influence of a great source of power for the left. When it comes to law firms, one of the reasons why they're trying to discourage pro bono activities by law firms is because a lot of those pro bono activities overwhelmingly go to left-leaning nonprofits. And when it comes to journalism, they're not going after Fox News. They're going after mainstream, usually left-dominated spaces. So that's the kernel of the strategy there. And of course, going after, trying to make your opponents less powerful and you more powerful is to a degree politics. But you have to play by the Constitution. You have to play by the rules and by the regulations. And if you don't, FIRE is going to oppose you every step of the way.
FIRE is, of course, your foundation for individual rights and expression. Excuse me, Greg, you're CEO and president. We did a show with David Graham from The Atlantic on Project 2025 a month or two ago. How much of this strategy in your mind was bound up in Project 2025? Is this, so to speak, a plot by the Trumpist wing of the Republican Party?
Well, a plot is usually something you keep secret. And in this
case,
an
open plot then. I don't want an open plot. What another word is for an open plot.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the funny thing was, like, how much time Trump on the campaign trail spent saying, oh, no, I don't even know what Project 2025 is. And who knows? Maybe he didn't, but he did hire a lot of the people who helped to write it. So a lot of the people who were part of drafting 2025 are now part of the administration. So yeah, I mean, like, a lot of what's come out of what you would have seen in 2025 is, coming true.
Coming true in the sense that the Republicans are, in your view at least, an authoritarian party. I know you probably would argue there are some people within the Democratic Party, but is this a particular problem within the Republican Party, given that Project 2025 was in some ways an official document?
Yeah, I mean, I oppose authoritarianism wherever I see it, and generally, some of the stuff that the Trump administration has been doing, yeah, it fits the bill. I mean, when it comes down to it, when you're trying to make up new powers that you don't have, that's authoritarian. When you are, and I actually think that some of the most pernicious stuff that a lot of people don't quite understand, or at least haven't heard as much about, because people are so enamored with Harvard. Yes, we're spending a lot of time defending them. I have a piece in The Atlantic coming out about this, raging against it as well tomorrow. But I do also feel like, but also Harvard's super sexy. Legally Blonde took place there. Like people love to talk about Harvard. But what's happening in the law firms, I think Americans should be more concerned about this. Now, a smart strategy that the Trump administration has had is to go after institutions that the public is not that sympathetic to. And probably right at the bottom of the list that Americans are sympathetic to are big, fancy white shoe law firms. But that's allowed him to a degree to get away with essentially saying, your lawyers pursued me in a variety of cases, or your lawyers pursued lines of argument that the government doesn't like. So therefore, I'm removing your security clearance, and I live in DC. A lot of lawyers, that's the end of a lot of lawyers' jobs in DC if they don't have security clearance. But worse, telling them they can't enter federal buildings, which of course include courthouses. I've never heard of anything like this. And so the attempt to coerce a lot of these law firms, it actually initially worked pretty well. Paul Weiss, which should be really ashamed of this, by the way, a very major law firm, capitulated very fast, offering Trump something like $50 million in pro bono services. Another law firm caved almost right away. But the attempt to actually scare lawyers into not being willing to oppose the government is terrifying. And I've really been trying to get people to really get how particularly pernicious that particular kind of attack is. Now, thankfully, there have been a number of decisions, even this past week, even 2 days ago, and I think that was Wilmer Hale was the most recent one, saying, no, you can't do this. This is nuts. And it was nice. The order for defending Wilmer Hale had exclamation marks in it, which you don't see a lot in legal documents about like how bad this approach is. So the Trump administration has been getting rebuked by courts quite a bit. But the big thing that I'm worried about, and given what I've seen from this administration so far, is I don't know if they keep on getting these legal setbacks, how much they're going to be listening to the courts. So that's speculation, of course, that they're going to just start ignoring what the courts are saying at an even greater degree than they already are. But that's what I'm worried about.
You went to Stanford Law, Greg, so you know a lot of these senior partners at these big white shoe law firms. Have you been surprised by the lack of backbone of a lot of these senior lawyers? Why is that? Why aren't these people standing up for what, especially since they could just leave some of these firms and reform?
Yeah. You know, I think it's particular to each individual firm why they capitulated. I want to do a shout out though right now for Covington and Burling. Covington and Burling was like, no, like from the beginning, and good on them. They deserve credit for that.
And John Kecker from San Francisco and Bob Van Ness wrote a very strong response a couple of months ago in the New York Times. Kecker Van Ness is a leading litigation firm in San Francisco.
Yeah, good. And so stand up to them. The ones that caved, when you read the letters, when they, like at Paul Weiss, when they were trying to justify why they caved, it was just, this could be the destruction of the firm. And talking to other kind of like older DC lawyers, like how many people were like, the old partners they would not have given an inch on this. They would have been like, I don't care if this whole law firm crashes and burns. I'm not doing what the government tells me to do. So there's definitely a lack, in some of these places, a lack of spine, a profound sort of self-interest, and some genuine cowardice. No offense, guys.
Yeah, well, I'm not taking offense. Even though I've been married to 2 lawyers. What about the media?
Hey, that's illegal.
Yeah, well, not at the same time. Greg, how has the media stood up? Again, we've had some shows about some large media firms folding in the face of Trump's lawfare. Yeah. What's your take on the media scorecard? Have they done better or worse than law firms?
It's a mixed bag. The case that we're really proud to be part of, which I mentioned before, was we're defending Ann Selzer. She's the pollster who came out with a poll saying that Harris is above by 2 points in Iowa. She was way off. It ended up being Trump won Iowa by like 12 points. But still, it was a flawed poll. She admitted it. She wrote about it. She retired after having her biggest failure in a poll. and showed a great deal of humility in that. But Trump has sued her under and the Des Moines Register, a newspaper in Iowa, under it's a product liability theory, like essentially like the kind of law that's put in place to say, like, if you do false advertising in diet pills and say you'll lose 40 pounds a day, that essentially that's why this person couldn't come out with a poll that ended up being wrong. It's complete nonsense as an argument. But one of the reasons why they're standing up, is that these are is that they've got the backing, Fire's representing them, and they're a smaller company. A lot of these bigger companies have been very quick to cave. Now, one that ended up being a lot more complicated than I initially thought, and I actually was a little bit embarrassed by this. So ABC News settled for about $15 million. Not the largest money compared to some of the other settlements that came out, because the Trump administration was suing them because is it Stephanopoulos?
Yeah.
He
it was Stephanopoulos.
Stephanopoulos, yeah. He kept on saying in an interview that Trump was found guilty of rape in a hearing. And when ABC News folded, I was like, "This is ridiculous! Like you would have won this libel case. Like, what are you doing? You're just trying to get this over with, and you don't want to incur the wrath of the Trump administration going forward. So you just in a cowardly way, you just caved." Like, within 24 hours of me saying that, it came out that Stephanopoulos had been told by lawyers, actually even lawyers that I know on staff, saying, actually, technically, the president was not found guilty of rape. He was found guilty of sexual abuse. He was specifically found not guilty. And it's civil court, so it's not even called guilty. Found responsible for sexual abuse. He was especially found not responsible for rape, for sexual assault. And so and that actually changes the analysis from a defamation standpoint, because like the standard for can you defame a public figure in the United States? The standard is, did you know or should have known that you were saying something that was really damaging and false? And in that case, unfortunately, the Trump administration would have a really good proof that Stephanopoulos actually purposely defamed him. So I understand a little bit better that why ABC might have been tempted to take that $15 million. So I'm a little less critical of ABC than I was before. But what's going on with CBS is awful.
Yeah, this is the interview, the Kamala Harris interview.
Yeah, absolutely. So CBS. So what happened was originally CBS ran a clip of an interview with Kamala Harris where she just didn't sound great. And she's kind of a word salad problem. But then when the actual show aired, it was edited in a way that, or at least the clip that they used, she sounded much more eloquent. And it didn't look great. But the Trump administration and a lot of people on the right got really angry about it, and that's fine. They're entitled to get angry about it, and they're entitled even to say that's unethical. But to bring in the FCC and to bring in the government to actually prosecute 60 Minutes and to demand ridiculous sums of money as penalty for, I think they even called it election interference, to editing this interview with Kamala Harris, they did some really unprecedented things too. Like they demanded the entire video of the interview with Harris. When they got it, the administration put it right online, which is also a stunt unlike I've ever seen in my career. And here's the thing. When people watched it, if the right had actually found it, that it was like just a 60 minutes of word salad, they would have crowed and crowed and crowed. But it actually turned out it wasn't that bad. It was a pretty standard interview, and it was pretty defensible that they used the clip that they used, and that's why you don't hear the right talking that much about it. But what's going on with CBS is CBS wants to have a merger with Paramount, and CBS is scared that unless they actually settle to the tune of a ridiculous sum of money, I don't even remember, like he keeps on upping it too. It's like in the billions, with the Trump administration, that they're not going to be allowed to do this merger, and that is absolutely an abuse of power that would have been a scandal in any other administration.
Greg, what do you make of the debate now, the furor over Jake Tapper's new book about the way in which there was a sort of informal censorship of the media around Biden? I'm not sure if this is really formally fire territory, but I'm curious as to your take on this more kind of polite self-censorship in contrast to the more aggressive lawfare that the Trump people seem to be pursuing.
I think it's. I'm thankful that Jake wrote that. I'm thankful people are being honest about it. I mean, I live in D.C. It's not. It wasn't. It was the worst kept secret in the world that he was.
Well, it was obvious. You didn't have to live in D.C. All you need to do is see him on TV for 50 seconds.
Well, but also, if you talk to people, like who actually like work in the administration or close to it, you get or see him, more often. It's much more from much earlier on. You're like, oh, he's struggling. So this is the worst kept secret in DC. And the fact that the media, consistently, kind of poo-pooed the idea that he was too old, like it was obvious that he wasn't too old, was something that they should be pretty embarrassed about. I think that the media, this is something that a conservative columnist for the Washington Post, Megan McArdle, actually argues it this way, that left-leaning media is harmful to the left. And what she means by that is sometimes it ends up telling the left, people on the left, what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. And in this case, I think a lot more people needed to hear a lot more forcefully and a lot more early that this guy is too old now. And I think that you can easily, I mean, I can at least easily imagine an entirely different scenario where the Democrats handle it very differently. And maybe they would have come up with a candidate. Maybe they wouldn't have. But maybe is it possible that they could have come up with a candidate who could have beaten Trump? Yeah, it's possible.
Certainly possible. I mean, in broad terms, you seem to be suggesting that there is a kind of constitutional crisis now when it comes to free speech in the US. We've done lots of shows on that. If that's the case, how has big tech held up? They've often been accused of being the most responsible for what's happened. Musk himself, of course, is not the most popular fellow in the world, and his ownership of X has created a great deal of controversy. Has big tech, Facebook, X, Google, have they done a better job than the big law firms and the big media firms?
That's a great question, and I just don't think they've been under the same kind of pressure. I at least haven't seen evidence of it.
Well, Facebook hasn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, lots of accusations, lots of meetings between Zuckerberg and Trump.
But I honestly think, like, particularly from seeing interviews with Zuckerberg, I think some of that is honest and it's actually consistent with stuff he'd been saying before. I mean, like he had a big event in DC back in like 2018, I think, saying that he doesn't want Facebook to be the arbiter of truth, like that basically he is concerned about accusations that it's biased. So Zuckerberg doesn't strike me as much as someone who's been coerced, but as someone who, when you go and you testify, when you say publicly that he should have actually stood up to the jawboning of both the Trump and the Biden administration during COVID, that tracked with everything I knew actually about him. And I was a little bit like I was a little bit startled when Facebook decided to go away from the top-down fact-checking approach to something more like a community notes approach. The freak out, as I would describe it, that people had as if this was the destruction of truth itself, because I'm definitely at this point in my career very skeptical of top-down when it comes to establishing truth. I think the fact that he decided to move the remaining fact checkers they have from Palo Alto to Texas, I saw some people kind of sneer at this as being, I can't imagine that would have any effect. I'm like, no, I've lived in Palo Alto. I would not trust us to be objective there. And then it turned out there is actually data on how much more the public would trust it if it was in a different part of the country, if it was outside of Silicon Valley, because the public, frankly, doesn't trust Silicon Valley, unsurprisingly. And what's interesting about like the way you establish truth in our system, it's what Jonathan Rauch calls liberal science. It's supposed to be.
Jonathan's an old friend of the show and of me.
Adore him, a dear friend of mine too. And his whole point is that it's an anarchical system. You have to persuade people, and people were arguing as if authority would have nothing to do whatsoever with the way community notes would then be decided. But of course, this would just mean that people on a more equal playing field would be citing the authorities that they find more persuasive in an effort to do a version of community notes that will be better accepted because it's not imposed from the top down.
Greg, some people might be watching this and thinking you're aggressively outspoken. John Roush is aggressively outspoken. You're both old friends of the show. There are many other people in America who are as equivalently outspoken, and no one's shutting you up. Where's the crisis here?
I have my own nonprofit. Like, who would shut me up?
Well, they could shut you down.
I mean, not for lack of trying. Other than kind of like the idea that like we can't get some funders to come on board. Yeah, people talk smack about your nonprofit, and if they don't like where you are politically,
but that's always been the case, hasn't it?
Yeah, but I'm insulated from that. If I were in academia, I wouldn't. I'd already been fired. Like by this point,
more than once, probably.
Oh,
on
yeah,
both sides. Both the left and the right would have fired simultaneously.
Well, yeah, that's exactly simultaneously, and probably the middle as well, because I'm so sort of critical of the fact that I think the higher education as currently conceived recapitulates class privilege. I feel like the PR department at most universities would want to get rid of me anyway. But so Roush and I are kind of hard to get to because Roush is at Brookings. Brookings is pretty well insulated, not completely, to be clear, insulated from political pressures. But my nonprofit, like the fact that I'm not in academia does give me some freedom that other people don't have. But even my co-author, Jonathan Haidt, he is very direct about this. He doesn't really talk about like politics in his classes because he one of the reasons why he did the project with me back in 2015, Coddling the American Mind, was because he started getting students policing what he was teaching. Like even when he was citing when he was citing like well-established like case studies from some psychology, that essentially like he shouldn't have cited that case study because it's offensive. And it's like,
and I take your point on Haidt, but he teaches at Haidt at NYU. He's essentially more powerful than the administration. He's a multi-best-selling author, enormously influential. He can push the administration around, can't he?
Well, and that has been something that I think I've seen very much in action, that if you have an existing platform, even if you're in academia, if you have an existing platform and you have lots of fans already outside of academia, you're very hard to cancel. So in 2020, which was one of the worst years I ever saw for professors losing their jobs, 2020, 2021, and 2022 were just terrible for professors losing their jobs. And by the way, it was mostly left-leaning professors, just center-left, leaning professors who were losing their jobs, and heterodox left. Because they would get it from both the right and the left, and that's a big target. But when there was an attempt to go after Steve Pinker for some of the stuff he wrote in some of his best-selling books, and I feel like a lot of the people at Harvard who had gone after lesser-known professors, and at other schools, had been quite successful at getting them either punished or fired. But Pinker, had this huge base of people who knew who he was, really liked him, and they came to his defense. So yeah, you are harder to cancel if you have a ton of fans, particularly outside of academia.
It's ironic that what Trump's doing to Harvard, Pinker wrote a long piece in the Times, is actually bringing Pinker and the left and everybody who teaches at Harvard back together.
Yeah.
Are there models, Greg, that are working? I mean, X hasn't always had a great reputation, although seems to me to be relatively open for better or worse. Are there still functioning platforms, social media, newspapers, television, radio, where the American model of free speech is working pretty well?
I'd say Substack.
And this is put out on Substack.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry, that's funny. I swear to God, I didn't know that. I have a Substack, ERI. I think that they really do try to keep it as a sort of free speech platform, but then let people who are all able to develop a good following. Like they run their own ship. And some of the people, who are really killing it on Substack are people who face cancellation attempts during the height of that
Yeah, I
stuff.
mean, Andrew Sullivan comes to mind.
Oh yeah, and Sullivan is always kind of fun to watch because he so dislikes the Trump administration that sometimes people on the left will forget that is actually quite a conservative, and when he's doing his job right, everybody's mad at him.
I know you have some strong feelings. In fact, on your Substack, you wrote about whether AI will kill our freedom to think. In a broader structural sense, given all these various crises, particularly in the university, and the emergence of AI, is that coincidental, these various crises, to free speech, and particularly the universities?
What a terrific question. My Substack is called The Eternally Radical Idea because I basically think that free speech is very unusual historically, and it's definitely not the rule for history. And that people my age, I'm 50, were lucky enough to grow up in a time where it was kind of on the ascendancy. First Amendment law was getting stronger. There was closer to a consensus that free speech was good. Particularly after the fall of the Soviet Union, it seemed like the final victory of small L liberalism, the end of history, as Fukuyama called it. That definitely, but I do always try to remind people that free speech is not normal. It's not our natural default setting. It's something that has to be learned, understood, maintained, and fought for. And that requires people to want it in the first place. So I think that when things start going bad for free speech, I don't necessarily see it as anything other than reversion to the mean. That essentially, like, if you don't positively defend free speech, respect for it goes down. I do think social media has sped everything up, that a lot of pre-existing polarization and institutional decay issues, polarization sped up and institutional decay became more apparent, thanks to social media. Just like the printing press, brought attention to problems that the elites of old Europe didn't necessarily want you to pay attention to, the thinness of their supposed knowledge, for example. So I definitely think that technology is accelerating a lot of these problems. But the AI issue, AI, and I gave this talk to my staff, because we're so overwhelmed with requests for help at the moment at FIRE, and from all over the spectrum, but particularly because of what the Trump administration is pulling, and it's exhausting. It's something new.
Do you let your staff play around with Anthropic and OpenAI?
Well, we have a Caltech grad as our CTO at FIRE, and he actually got us a internal AI account, so that we're not sharing our data, with ChatGPT, for example, but we can use it in-house, because I really want people to understand it. I want people to know what it's good at, what it's not good at, what it's capable of, because I'm actually I see great potential in AI. I think people should understand it, but there's also the possibility of tyranny, through AI. So the article that you just showed was us working with the Cosmos Institute to actually to contribute to funding about $1 million in spot grants for people to develop AI that's more focused on truth seeking, that's kind of like an epistemically, intellectually humble version of AI that promotes freedom of speech, discussion, because the potential for AI to be top-down tyranny is real. And then, of course, the potential for AI to be, just a device of complete, perfect chaos, even to a degree a libertarian-leaning person like me would find, dangerous. And we have to be, as wise as possible as we are in developing this, because getting this wrong could be disastrous on every possible level.
When historians look back at the 2020s, especially mid-2020s, Greg, say in 25 years, by the middle of the 21st century, what do you think will be most salient when it comes to free speech? I wonder whether it will be American relations with Israel and the Gaza war. What's your take on the way in which Gaza has become both the cause and effect of the crisis of free speech in America in the mid-20s?
I think it will be understood as a flashpoint in the United States, particularly on campus, but also in our relationship with the rest of the world. I think that will be seen as kind of a turning point, but in a larger crisis. And I think that when people look back on the 2020s, from 2050, 2060, they're going to see this as a period of crisis. And I'm temperamentally an optimist, but I do actually think that on many fronts, the crisis is going to get worse, at least for many years to come. And I believe in free speech because free speech works really well. Societies that can actually talk to each other honestly and openly about their problems, about their concerns, about their ideas will have advantages over either. But I've been worried about a crisis coming for a long time, and I think we're already in it.
And if in 2028 another Democrat is elected, is that the end of the crisis, or is it really bipartisan in terms of the crisis?
It's very different manifestations, and it's really, I do try to practice the epistemic humility that I preach, and I will say this: Trump has done complete havoc to my ability to predict anything. And I think most people who didn't see him coming should admit that. And it's hard for me to even imagine what 2028 is even going to look like, because I'm curious, like really watching what's going on the Democratic side and wondering what it's going to look like by 2028, because you've got this this movement I love, for example, advocated by people like Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson,
the abundance movement.
The abundance movement. I am all for it. I tried to get my Democrat friends together in 2003 to basically do something really similar. But will that win on the Democratic side? I don't know. And since so much of what happens in politics is an interrelationship with what's going on the other side, who the candidate is going to be in 2028 is so uncertain as of this point. Will it be AOC? Will it be Fetterman? Like it could be anybody at this point. Who knows?
Could it be Greg Lukianoff?
God, no. That's the late great Nat Hentoff actually wrote a column proposing me for president, and I scolded him to the extent to which you can scold one of your heroes, by saying it's like, please don't nominate me for the worst job in the world.
Yeah, you're busy enough. Finally, Greg, I know FIRE is very concerned, obviously, with what's happening in the university. You had on your blog, you talk about international students fearing Trump now as the real threat over Beijing. Is the American model, you talk about this crisis when it compares to China, are the Chinese rubbing their hands and thinking every time Greg Lukianoff and FIRE take on another case, our cause is strengthened? Is the new Cold War between the Chinese and the American model, are the Chinese winning?
As in, are they winning in terms of of pushing more countries in a more authoritarian direction?
Well, in terms of young people, of where they want to study, what they like, what the models are that they refer to, in terms of foreign relations and America's determination, it seems, at least under Trump, to cut itself off from the rest of the world, whereas the Chinese are doing the reverse. Yeah,
what we're doing with foreign students, and actually what we're doing with all of our allies in the world at the moment, I think is profoundly alienating. And I think the underestimating the importance of soft power, just understanding the extent to which American musicals, like in the 1930s, really helped American, people like America, and that helped our diplomacy. But when you actually have people coming to this country like Rusmea Ozturk, and then being deported for an op-ed that she wrote that was critical of Israel, but not in a mainstream.
This was the Tufts woman,
the Tufts student. She was the one who plainclothes police officers.
Yeah, everyone saw that one.
Immigration people, stuffed her into a van. That's the kind of stuff that is going to make. I'm sure it already is making people much more hesitant to come here. And meanwhile, the Trump administration is actually trying to revoke some of these schools' ability to have international students in the first place. So I think it's not exactly the way you win the international battle for hearts and minds, shall we say.
To put it mildly. I don't always do this, Greg, but finally, tell us a little bit about FIRE. And I hope most of our audience are very sympathetic to what you're doing. How can people help you? What do we need to do to make sure that FIRE continues to exist and protect free speech?
Oh, that's fair. That's very kind of you. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression is 26 years old this year. We were founded by a left-leaning civil libertarian, Harvey Silverglate, and a right-leaning expert of the Enlightenment libertarian named Alan Charles Kors. And we try to actually be the most stalwart, nonpartisan free speech group that's, and that's only devoted to freedom of speech. And when we're doing our job right, the left and the right both hate us. But the people who love us are the people who get free speech as a value, as a human right, as something important of itself, as fundamental to what a free country actually is. And so it's a hard funding model, to be clear. Like if I wanted to make money, like for FIRE, then you just lean hard right or hard left. And that's how you bring in the money. Meanwhile, FIRE goes the much harder way, which is constantly pissing off people on the right and the left. So we can only rely on people who really get it, who think free speech is worth it, that free speech is special, that it's good for progress and peace and innovation and all these wonderful things, and authenticity for that matter. So if you if you believe in it, if you believe in free speech as a core human right and American value, please support us. We could really use the help.
Well, I'm going to vote for you, Greg Lukianoff, for president for 2028. I think I'm going to start a new movement. Congratulations on all your good work in protecting free speech, Greg. And in these constitutionally troubling times, we will certainly have you on the show in the not too distant future. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Real pleasure.